Hi, I started to write something today and couldn't finish it, so I'm going to comment on it because I was reading the paper. And what I wanted to say was that the class that governs any class that governs society, the capitalist class in our case, owns the means by which we produce the necessities of life. I know for leftists and socialists and people who are paying attention, this is basic stuff, but they own the means of producing the necessities of life, the objects we need, this camera, this chair, and what have you, or we refer to it as the means of production. But they don't only own the means of production, the factories, the machines, and what have you, but they also own the labour process itself. They own the process of work, where they put these material objects together with human labour power. They buy us, they buy our labour power, they buy the machinery, they have the factory, and they put that together. They own that entire process, which means that they own the product, the result of it, the end result of it. So I was thinking about that, but it's not all that they own. They not only do they own the manufacture of things, they own the manufacture of ideas. The dominant ideology in a society, in a class society, is the ideology of the class that rules it. I mean, if you look at the British under feudalism, the dominant ideology was the king is king by God's will. It was called the divine right of kings. Well, that didn't pop out of the head of a serf or the peasant that was working in the field. The king thought it up, and his whole class of friends. And it was very effective, because if you believed in God, if you believed that this creator, this was this man's representative here, God's vicar, they used to call him, then to challenge the system, to challenge this system and its governance was almost beyond belief. And in fact, the great revolutionaries in the English Revolution had a very difficult time doing that. I always used to say, well, along came Cromwell and said, well, let's cut off the king's head and we'll see what happens. And, well, you have a new day. So they control the labour process, they control the ideas in society. Now, if you take most of us in capitalist society, we're wage workers, we're not peasants, we don't have a little plot of land, work on the Lord's land and what have you. We're not slaves in the sense that we're owned in total. We wage workers. We sell our labour power, our ability to work. They buy that off of us and we work for them. But we work for them under their direction. We work under the supervision of the capitalist class or its representatives that own this process. And so what's happened more and more, of course, is that with new technology, increased production, productivity, is that fewer and fewer workers can produce the same amount of products or more. So what happens is, and it's happened at my workplace, is you get this intermediary. Well, before I go there, if you work for a small capitalist like a coffee shop or a plumber or a small contractor who hires one or two people when they need them, you might work alongside them, or you work under their direction. If you work in a liquor store, they work a bit and they also manage their liquor store, whatever they do. But under the big, in general, we don't even see the people. We don't know the people. It's hard to find the people that actually have that power over us and control that process. Might be a group of them, one or two of them, or what have you. And generally today, even if you take somebody like Warren Buffett, he doesn't own a factory like they did in the old days where it was on the hill and the workers were down there working in the factory. They have holding companies and all these financial structures that they use to facilitate this process, this labour process, because profit is made, their income is made, they get rich through that labour process. That's another subject. But so I see it even at work, where there's that more and more there's an intermediary layer of supervisory managers of people. They're watchers of people. They're to ensure that the collective solidarity and class consciousness doesn't manifest itself. They try to keep that down through mixture of the carrot and the stick. Some are more brutal, some are just nicer and all of that, but the goal is the same, to keep to suppress that. So over a period of time, workers have come to understand that we are a distinct class. We built trade unions, first around our own trades to protect our trades. We rejected industrial unionism. Oh, well, that's riffraff. I'm a skilled worker. That's in the United States. The same thing in Britain and in Europe. Workers built unions. We built organizations to protect ourselves. And we also eventually built political parties. And a political party is a completely different animal. A trade union defends workers on the job, our wages, that I get the overtime next week and I get a raise next year, this, that and the other. It's a bit more complicated, but in the main that's what that is. A political party, though, that governs society. A political party governs, it makes laws, it passes legislation, it gets involved in trade, it gets involved in international relations. It broadens broadens working class consciousness. I mean, somebody once told me that the British Labour Party, I was never active in it, had thousands and thousands of shop stewards, active shop stewards in it. When I was in an organisation that was inside that Labour Party, they had politicians elected to office. You could become elected to office. There was a structure where you could become, through the Labour Party, without spending millions and billions of dollars, you could become political. So it was a distinct, separate political party, that was based on the working class and the working class communities. They arose in other countries like the SDP in Germany, which was much earlier, social democratic parties, socialists and communists in France. But that's what has developed with us. Now, over the years, and the reason it developed in Britain was at the early part of the 20th century, British imperialism was on the decline. The First World War finished it off, and the Second for sure. And it could no longer buy off a section of its own working class to keep the larger section down, to come out and say, don't worry, work hard, this intermediary layer. And that intermediary layer, just like they do here with the middle classes, just plays the same role, and especially with the black population. I remember when Joseph Hawkins, I can't remember whether I said this earlier or in another video, but Joseph Hawkins got killed in New York, and the black folks shut down the whole city, and they traipse out the black mayor, hey, work through the system, we can make it. That's what that middle class layer, the role it plays. It's getting harder and harder to do that, particularly with the black community here, as the crisis is so acute with the assassination of black people by the cops on a daily basis. And many of those leaders in the past are just being brushed aside. We're seeing good developments here with regard to that. So, but most of our history, our working class history, is lost. The great 1877 uprising, the 1893 Pullman strike, the struggle to build the unions, the Seattle General Strike, the IWW struggling against that fought the lumber battles in the lumber industry, also in the South to unite black and white workers in the South. Also the great three general strikes in 1934. Minneapolis, Toledo, and San Francisco, these huge developments, textile strikes, the 1912 Lawrence strike, all of this history is lost in us. Even the civil rights movement, which is fairly recent, the 50s and 60s, is completely, they carnivalize it. They try, if you take Malcolm X, they'll name a school after him and everything else, and Martin Luther King, what have you. But the ideas, what they stood for, their most radical conclusions they drew about society, they try desperately and they use the middle class to do that. They try to suppress it. Malcolm X said you can't have capitalism without racism, and that's a pretty radical statement. So what made me think about all of this was I was reading this paper today about the spending on warplanes. There's an arms race going on, an arms race. And I believe it's being driven by the United States foreign policy. They can't help it though, because capitalism is an economic system where it is not a friendly system, where they will go to war. The two world wars were over market share and profits. The British didn't go into Africa because they didn't, some people with black skin over there, let's go over there. The Irish had white skin, they went in there too. Capitalism has to expand. It's the struggle for markets. It cannot There are laws to it that they cannot overcome, and that's what we're seeing with NATO and the US in Eastern Europe. It's got troops on the Latvian border. It's got a missile defense system in Poland that it claims to protect against an Iranian invasion. Nobody in the world believes that. Only here in America, where probably most people wouldn't know who Iran is anyway, think they're Arabs as well. So, you know, there's a very powerful media here that's the most censored in the advanced capitalist countries. It's in the South China Sea. You've got the president of the Philippines is saying he wants the troops out there because this ridiculous war on terror, they'll get dragged into it. You've got the surrounding of bases. The US has got about 280 bases around the world, and that's why we're being driven to conditions that existed before the 30s. They cannot give us, as we use on this blog, and Sean uses it a lot, the other writer on the blog, one of the other writers on the blog, they cannot afford guns and butter. In the 43 years I've been here, they've driven the auto down to half their wages. They've driven kids are working 3 jobs. School is at $1.2 trillion in debt. They've savaged areas of the country. North Carolina, West Virginia is a basket case. But they are forced to continue down this path, this destructive path, and make us pay for it. The government is 19 trillion in debt, but this arms race is really dangerous. The situation in Syria is a proxy war being fought out there, that's very close to Russia. Russia, as I say, I'm no supporter of Putin, but all capitalist nations have ambitions. They're not in Canada, the Russians. They're not in Puerto Rico. They're not in Cuba. They're not in Mexico. Geez, they'd go nuts here if that were the case. And so it's just it's a very, very dangerous situation. And there's increase in nuclear competition with China, America, and I was reading about the Russians and the Chinese are developing new aircraft to defeat because of our aircraft. And the F-35 was the most contentious here. Cost us about $1 trillion over 50 years. That's what their journal said in 2011. And they're about 400 billion each. Well, of course, the Russians are going to build one to counter it. The Chinese are, and that's what they say here. You know, they just say that they're building weapons that could challenge the superiority of the US, spurring a new arms race. And there's a heightening urgency among Western military brass to push for their own next generation of combat planes. Where can this possibly lead except for mass bloody destruction? And it's really not ruled out in the near period. We could see a small nuclear confrontation, or the terrorist groups and the insane groups that have arisen out of broken nation states getting hold of one. There is nothing but danger and tragedy ahead if capitalism is not stopped. And although the industrial working class has moved from the west to the east, Bangladesh, Cambodia, China, and what have you, capitalism will not be overthrown without the American working class settling accounts with the few thousand nasty characters, unelected characters that run this country. They don't care any more about us than they do about foreign workers. So why I say this about a class distinct class, they've driven back this history. We have great history in this country, great history of class solidarity, as racism and everything else that's existed. But there have been great moments in history where workers have come together, because when workers move into struggle, there's a tendency to overcome these other divisions of racism, sexism, all of these type of divisions, and seek a class ally. And we learn from these struggles. That's how we learn, when we see that it's in our self-interest concretely, that racism, sexism, and other religious discrimination is contrary to us, to our self-interest. And so I wanted to raise that question about this question of a class. Workers can govern. We can govern. Capitalism rose and out of the ashes of feudalism. It's not existed throughout history. Capitalism arose violently. It dragged the British peasantry off their land and their means of subsistence, just as it did the Native American people here. there's a difference when they travel outside their own borders because they're freer their strategy is somewhat different. They don't attack their own working classes racially different. They think of them as different intellectually and what have you. The Irish were considered white chimpanzees by the British bourgeois, so it's arisen in the most violent way, and it took centuries of struggle against human beings, the collective nature of human beings, for justice, for a relationship with the land, for a relationship with each other, and for a decent life. So it's not omnipotent. The problem is they hide every attempt. Look at a strike of 150 million in India last week, not mentioned. Americans wouldn't know where Iran is, half of them, although probably more so now. But they keep all of this from us. They keep us obsessed with this stuff, the sports. They're very powerful here. The media is very powerful here. The Hollywood is very powerful here. You've got these two. We have no political party of our own. This is a mistake. It's something that will be rectified. I've joined the Green Party and I'm going to vote for the Green Party. I have a position on the Green Party that they should orient more to the working class, to the trade unions, become a socialist party. It's passed an eco-socialist plank. Its leadership, the two candidates to my knowledge don't mention this in their debates, that it has an eco-socialist plank. Where it will end up, I don't know. But the main thing I wanted to say when I was thinking of this, because people look at this and they say, well, what can we do? I don't support Putin. I don't support Assad. I don't believe there's any solution to this under capitalism. I don't believe there's any solution to the Israeli-Palestinian situation or the environment or poverty under capitalism. But sometimes there's no immediate solution. There will be more tragedy, more violence. It will be more confused. There'll be reaction that will develop. They will be coming together at certain times, and that's because the working class is not on the scene. Only a global movement of the working class will stop this. You can't, sometimes there's no immediate solution. The working class has been decimated to a great degree through the role of US imperialism in the Middle East. And without a revolutionary leadership at some point, when workers move into struggle and throw up their own political organs, they're generally what we call reformist organs, to make the world better, to make capitalism nicer. When we move into struggle, it's to make the immediate better. But as we learn through struggle, and if there is a revolutionary leadership that's learned lessons, historical lessons of our struggle, we come to the conclusion that we have to change the very structure of society, the way it's organized, how production is organized. The future, I believe, I'm optimistic because I have faith that the working class will move into struggle, but there is really a potential for some serious crisis and unnecessary tragedy because of it. But the main thing is for us to reject this mind-numbing. Doesn't mean we don't have fun, go to the pub, have a drink, but to reject, study our own history, understand our own history, and understand that we can, working class people, working class is the only force that can change society. Working class people can govern society. So I hope that makes some sort of sense. I'm saying it really to workers that were like myself, are thinking workers that are grappling with what we can do and where the future is. We all have children. We have an obligation to our children and our grandchildren to get off our asses and to look for answers.